First name Mr. Last name Glass.
Elijah Price, aka Mr. Glass, Origins, exploring this kick-ass supervillain from the Unbreakable universe. M. Night Shyamalan is a master filmmaker in his own right, and among some of his greatest films include the movies in the Unbreakable trilogy. The trilogy explores superheroes and villains set in the context of today's world, completely different from the way in which traditional superhero movies such as Superman or Spider-Man approach the genre.
I truly am a mastermind.
In this world, metahumans are kept under wraps, and some of them are very, very dangerous. In a world like this, we are introduced to one of the film's best villains, Mr. Glass, played by the brilliant Samuel L. Jackson, a superhero movie veteran. This villain will truly boggle your mind. Intrigued? Keep watching as we trace his origins and storyline within the Unbreakable universe. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
They call me Mr. Glass at school because I break like glass.
Did a troubled childhood shape the way Mr. Glass turned out? Elijah's childhood was not like most others and was shown in detail in the first film of the trilogy, Unbreakable. Right at birth, Elijah Price was diagnosed with type 1 osteogenesis imperfecta, a rare genetic disease that made his bones incredibly brittle. As the attending physician swiftly realized, just giving birth was sufficient to break infant Elijah's limbs, and this condition would go on to cast a dark shadow on his childhood. To make matters worse, frequent trips to the hospital kept young Elijah secluded throughout his boyhood, forcing him to turn to his one major hobby, reading comic books for solace. The other kids in the neighborhood regularly called him Mr. Glass because of his fragility. Yet, as deleted footage from the movies shows, he persisted in his attempts to blend in, frequently with disastrous results. For example, when visiting a fairground, he tried to ride one of the more extreme rides, but ended up breaking numerous bones when his makeshift safety padding fell off. Elijah eventually gave up on leaving the house because of the harassment meted out to him by his peers, and the possibility of future harm further added to his reluctance to go outside or attend school. Elijah's mother, however, came up with a workaround. After purchasing a lot of comic books as gifts for her son, she would frequently place one of them on a park bench near their home, thereby making Elijah walk outside to recover the comic book before it could be taken by a passerby. Elijah spent a lot of his time by himself, even if this plan by his mother progressively had the effect of strengthening his confidence and motivating him to go outside. This resulted in a lack of social life and possibly even stunted his social growth in his formative years. In fact, it is a combination of social and physical seclusion and an obsession with comic books that shaped Elijah into the villain we come to know as Mr. Glass. While comic books kept him company as a child, Elijah developed an interest in superhumans as he got older, gravitating to the idea that they were, in fact, real. Drawing on his vast comic book expertise, he became convinced that superheroes had once existed in real life. He also thought that people with real superpowers had been revered in the past as mythical figures before being exaggerated to the point of absurdity by the modern movie industry. He even proposed the idea that he symbolized how weak a human could be. Then, possibly, there existed a person on the planet who was positioned at the other end of the spectrum and was immune to injury like the majority of humans. What began initially with him reading the news for accounts of people who had avoided injury after major disasters became a lifetime fascination with the possibility of metahumans walking amongst us that would eventually reach hazardous levels. Elijah eventually opened his own comic book art gallery, limited edition, as a result of his dedication to comic books and his love for superpowered beings. Despite being considered by the general public as a completely professional company, this gallery was also to become Elijah's workshop, with his office acting as a planning hub for ongoing efforts to find his superhuman counterpart. Here he would create bombs, plot potential attacks, and map out patterns of survival amid various global disasters, some of which he himself had planned and carried out, and some of which were were wholly unavoidable, such as natural disasters like earthquakes. In fact, Elijah had started his search for his counterpart in earnest just before the movie's events by blowing up an aeroplane and setting a hotel on fire, both of which caused a large number of victims. However, he had been unable to identify a survivor thus far, and it is this continued search that would later lead him to David Dunn. Thus, it is without question that circumstances and events in his childhood shaped young Elijah into the calculating and terrifying man he would grow up to be. A lot of this can also be chalked up to fate on the lottery of birth, since being born with a disease that his mother decidedly did not have, nor was preemptively aware of before baby Elijah was born, was definitely a major factor in how his life played out. If he did not have type 1 osteogenesis imperfecta, he would have grown up a normal boy. He still might have developed a love for comics, but the duality that he created in his mind of him being a frail being and that someone indestructible had to exist to complement him was a result of his unique experience with brittle bone disease. What disability does Mr. Glass suffer from? As detailed in the films, Mr. Glass suffered from type 1 osteogenesis imperfecta 01, generally known as osteogenesis imperfecta. This refers to a set of genetic illnesses that result in weak bones due to a deficit or a defect in type 1 collagen, a protein that is a key structural element in bones and connective tissue. Because of the fact that those who have it frequently experience structural fractures for what seems to be no apparent reason, it is also known as brittle bone disease, alluding to the idea that the person's bones are brittle and prone to injury without any serious harm being caused to them. This is seen when Elijah often breaks his bones as a young kid, when similar injuries would not have caused fractures in other kids. OI is further categorized into various types based on genetic traits and the symptoms that are experienced by people who have it. The most prevalent and mildest type of OI is type 1. Type 1 OI has a genetic abnormality that results in a normal collagen structure but lower than normal collagen production. This is in contrast to all other kinds of OI, where not only is there not enough collagen produced, but the structure of the collagen that is produced is weaker. This is also the type of OI that Mr. Glass is affected with. There is, however, some confusion because Elijah also mentions type 2 and type 4 OI in the films. Individuals with type 1 osteogenesis imperfecta experience varying degrees of disease complexity. During the course of their lives, some people will only experience a few fractures, while others will experience several broken bones. Moreover, they will have weak muscles, loose joints, a triangle-shaped face, and blue eye tint in the whites of their eyes. Moreover, they are more likely to experience hearing loss that begins in their 20s or 30s, as well as brittle teeth. Type 1 OI patients often reach a normal height and live a normal life duration, as is expected of most humans. In the world, 1 in 10,000 to 20,000 newborns are born with osteogenesis imperfecta. About 20,000 to 50,000 persons in the US have it, making it a rare condition. The only real risk factor for this genetically inherited condition is your blood relationship. Most people with osteogenesis imperfecta, particularly those with a milder variant, have a relative who also has OI. In other cases, it's a brand new genetic mutation that evolved in those humans. De novo mutations are what this is known as, and regrettably, there is no way to stop them. Unfortunately, there is no treatment for OI. Yet there are therapies that help strengthen bones, lessen the chance of fracture, and ease the burden of carrying out regular activities in daily life. As far as Mr. Glass in the Unbreakable trilogy is concerned, Elijah's type 1 osteogenesis imperfecta, which has made his bones incredibly brittle, is obviously his most crippling handicap. Due to this, he was born with broken arms and legs, and he also fractured numerous bones in his body when he fell down a flight of stairs. As a result of this, Elijah would frequently use a bluish-black rhinestone walking cane as a mobility aid when he was younger. However, after breaking his arm while attempting to keep up with a man he thought was carrying a gun, Elijah had to use a wheelchair to get around. In his 56-year-long life, Elijah had endured 94 fractures or bone breaks in all. This finally resulted in his demise, since Elijah was so easily brutalized by the beast's superhuman strength that his shoulder, collarbone, and ribcage were all crushed with a single blow, and his internal organs were cut open by the broken bones. Thus, the character has a real disease, further making the movie more real than any other superhero film. It also gives him a brilliant villain origin story, although some might critique the light in which the disease and its resultant impact on Elijah's life are shown.
Hey.
Samuel L. Jackson stole the show as Mr. Glass in the franchise. Mr. Glass, played by Samuel L. Jackson, features the overarching villain of the entire trilogy. However, he primarily appears in the first and third films, since the second one, Split, largely focused on James McAvoy's character Kevin, who suffered from a dissociative identity disorder. Samuel L. Jackson definitely makes his presence felt in both films, as he schemes and strategizes and even successfully carries out various nefarious plots such as bombings and train crashes, all just to find his polar opposite, a superhuman that is indestructible, to contrast how frail he was.
No. No, 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 no.
A young Mr. Glass is unbreakable. Starting at the beginning, audiences are introduced to a young Mr. Glass in the first movie of the trilogy, Unbreakable. We watch as baby Elijah is born, but panic immediately ensues as the baby keeps crying in pain right after being born. A doctor arrives and subsequently rushes the baby to the hospital, thinking that the baby has sustained injuries during delivery, and soon after, the doctors realize that baby Elijah had the brittle bone disease and, as a result of it, had sustained injuries during delivery, making the baby cry in pain. This disease would go on to have a major impact on his life. We soon learn that Elijah was brought up largely in the confines of the four walls of his home due to the fact that he had the brittle bone disease. He often spent time in front of the television, and once, after getting hurt, he decided that he would never go out again. His mother tried supporting him to the best of her ability, encouraging him to go out and live a normal life, but the intense fear of getting hurt, along with the fact that he was often bullied as a result of his condition, resulted in him becoming a recluse. His mother even tried enticing him with comic books, and while that fostered Elijah's interest in comic books and the world of metahumans and superpowered beings, his social life did not get any better. He found solace in the made-up world of comics, and soon his entire life revolved around it. He grows up and decides to pursue his passion, comic books, and opens up a comic book art gallery called Limited Edition. However, more sinister passions lurk underneath the surface as he theorizes that superhumans must exist and sets out on a quest to find one. His theory rests largely on the idea of balance. In the same way that in comic books there are both heroes and villains, he believes that there must exist superpowered, indestructible beings to complement his existence as a frail entity. Trying to find one such superhuman, he descends into a life of clandestine crime. Elijah orchestrates a train accident that kills 130 passengers and crew right at the start of the movie. Yet, a security guy named David Dunn manages to survive the horrifying tragedy. Ecstatic about the possibility of finally managing to locate a superpowered human, Elijah approaches David and leaves a business card on the front of his car, inviting him to Limited Edition, his comic book art gallery, so that he can figure out if David is, in fact, superhuman or is just plain lucky. This note makes David question his whole existence as he tries to figure out if he does, in fact, have superpowers. He goes to meet Elijah out of curiosity as well. However, David is not persuaded after hearing the eccentric art dealer's theory and leaves the gallery feeling conned. Unfazed, Elijah, determined to figure out the secret of the survivor, follows him to the place he works, the football stadium, gradually enticing him into a lengthy chat. During this time, David demonstrates an innate and uncanny ability to sense criminal activity or prior wrongdoings simply by touching people as he passes a line of people waiting to be admitted into the stadium. sensing that one of the men in line is concealing a pistol. Elijah views this as another evidence of superhuman abilities, but David is once more skeptical since the man exits the line before he can be patted down. Elijah, though, makes the decision to pursue the man out of the stadium to prove his point. However, he stumbles as he chases the man down a flight of steps, which results in him falling and breaking numerous bones. But he is later redeemed when he learns that his target is in fact armed, proving that Dunn had some sort of superhuman sensing ability. Now confined to a wheelchair for the following weeks, Elijah is set for physiotherapy, and as fate would have it, his physiotherapist turns out to be Audrey, David's wife. Over the course of their relationship as a result of constant physiotherapy, Audrey and Elijah end up talking a lot. During this time and through their conversations, Elijah learns that David allegedly suffered an injury in a car accident that ended his career as a football player back when he was much younger. This story largely casts doubts in the minds of the audiences, since as injury would mean that David was not a superhero. Elijah, however, is convinced that David fabricated his injuries and gave up his dream of becoming a professional athlete in order to marry Audrey. This entire time, David continues to doubt Elijah's theories about superhuman endurance and considers discontinuing their association. He also finds out that he is weirdly vulnerable to water. Elijah soon persuades him, though, that his susceptibility to water is only a superhuman Achilles heel, just like how kryptonite was for Superman, and persuades him to use his abilities to hunt down criminals, putting his powers to the test. David takes Elijah's advice and goes out to stop crime, hopefully unlocking his superpowers in the process. David then attends an exhibition at Limited Edition to commemorate succeeding in doing so and, in the process, saving 2 kids from a homicidal home intruder. In the exhibition, Elijah shakes David's hand and praises him for finding his true calling in life. Remember how David can sense crime and criminal intention simply by touching a person? Well, simply by virtue of shaking Elijah's hand, David is made aware of Elijah's atrocities by his ability to detect injustice via touch, including the train catastrophe. As his mentor exposes himself through the handshake and claims that the fatalities were all necessary in order to uncover a real superhero, David can only watch in despair and disbelief. The handshake was a deliberate ploy by Elijah to make David aware of all that he had done to find him and unlock the superhero that lay dormant within him. In fact, he was proud of his activities and deeds and wanted David to know the efforts he had undertaken and the lengths he had gone to. After revealing all his secrets to Dunn, Elijah is subsequently overcome with passion as he reveals that he has now discovered his life's mission, his mission being to play the arch-villain to David's hero. He even goes so far as to say that his childhood nickname, Mr. Glass, should have served as a warning that he was destined to be a villain. I mean, fair enough, Mr. Glass is a comic book villain name if there ever was one. In the end, David leaves the comic book art gallery because he can't handle the truth. The last few captions explain that upon knowing the truth, David helped the police locate Elijah, who had been admitted to a facility for criminally insane people. Elijah was, however, happy that, despite being imprisoned, he had finally found a superhero to explain his own destiny as a supervillain. Samuel L. Jackson delivers a brilliant performance as Elijah in this film. He is charismatic, yet his charisma is laced with a hint of evil. He shows his obsessive nature, but just enough so that people do not detect the true nature of his personality. His character brilliantly contrasts Bruce Willis's David Dunn, and the film unravels in such a way that the empathy one feels for Mr. Glass upon seeing his childhood struggles causes a dissonance in the mind of the viewer when it is revealed that he is the mastermind behind horrifying tragedies that have caused in major losses of life. Samuel L. Jackson received a lot of praise for playing the part of Elijah Price back in the year 2000, and it is easy to see why.
Everything extraordinary can be explained away, and yet it is true.
The return of Elijah Price in Glass. Even though the idea of a trilogy was originally shut down, M. Night Shyamalan managed to find a workaround for it. He cleverly weaved his ideas of superheroes and other meta-human beings, taking from the sequel script and crafting the story of Kevin Wendell Crumb in Split. Split was a surprise sequel to the original movie, which Samuel L. Jackson had originally believed would be a standalone film, since the studio had declined to finance a direct sequel. However, it is in the dying moments of Split that the movie's connection to Mr. Glass is stated. The last few seconds of Split ties in with Elijah Price, where Mr. Glass is name-dropped as a serial killer, and Dunn sets out to find and defeat Kevin's evil alters, known as the Horde. While the last installment in the trilogy largely focuses on a major showdown between the two metahumans, Kevin in his beast form and David Dunn, Mr. Glass also shows up. During the course of the movie's events, Elijah is shocked to witness David and Kevin being arrested and brought to the same asylum where he had been detained for many years post his arrest in the 2019 movie Glass. Dr. Ellie Staple, who is holding the three of them captive, over the course of the film attempts to convince them that they are suffering from mental illnesses rather than having superhuman abilities. David, Elijah, and Kevin all refuse to believe this. However, since it turns out that Dr. Staple is a member of a society that is hostile to proof of superhumans and has plans to assassinate David, Elijah, and Kevin in order to carry out their mission, Elijah then teams up with Kevin to reveal the reality of supers to the world after learning Staple's true motives. However, they can only do so once they are able to escape the supervision of Dr. Staple and the rest of the asylum orderlies. The solution? An escape plan. Being the brain in the trio, Elijah devises a plan to break out from their cells and tells Kevin that one of the Horde will have to free them after retrieving his outfit out of the evidence locker. While they travel underground, Dennis assumes the identity of an orderly to carry out the escape. Once the moment arrives, one of Kevin's alters, Dennis, tells Elijah to push his wheelchair forward when some guards approach. Elijah does so, and Kevin uses his beast persona to slaughter the security personnel. Elijah successfully manages to escape the facility as a result of this partnership. He then sets up a fight between David and Kevin on the grounds of the facility once they are outdoors. Nevertheless, during their confrontation, Kevin learns through David's son Joseph that Elijah is the one who caused his father's death in the same train catastrophe. Now, considering the fact that Kevin developed dissociative identity disorder as a child as a result of the abuse from his mother post his father's death, this knowledge seems to tell Kevin that both he and Dunn were created by the villainous acts of Elijah Price. This results in the Beast unleashing his powers on Mr. Glass, and well, a fight between these two was always bound to end in shambles. The Beast crushed Elijah's shoulder before hitting him hard in the chest, cracking his ribs and rupturing his lung. Elijah also breaks both of his legs after falling out of his wheelchair and collapsing from blood loss. Later, due to a combination of severe bone fracture damage, blood loss, and respiratory failure, Elijah passes away in his mother's arms. In his dying breaths, he insists that he is not a mistake, and his mother concurs, telling him that he is indeed amazing. However, even in his death, he achieves his objective and is able to expose the existence of superpowered humans to the world.
Wasn't a mistake, Mama.
Once again, brilliantly played by Samuel L. Jackson, the implications that his character has in this film are mind-blowing. It is already insane that he was the reason behind Kevin's tough childhood. The death of his father and the train crash that saw Dunn as its sole survivor was a major catalyst in his mother's terrible behavior towards him. Unable to deal with the grief of her husband's death, she took it out on her son, causing him to develop dissociative identity disorder. The same train crash also started the tenuous relationship between David Dunn and Elijah. Last but not least, the character's brilliant foresight is what led him to become a villainous legend, even post his death, since he was able to achieve all his goals. It did not matter to him that he had to give up his life to do so.
I truly am a mastermind.
What was Mr. Glass like in general? Addressing first his appearance, Elijah was an attractive, tall, slim African-American guy with brown eyes and thick, long, curly black hair that was fashioned into an afro. As he aged, his hair grew longer, grayer, and less groomed. Further, it was seen that black flakes had formed along his teeth, suggesting tooth damage. He also allowed some facial stubble to develop while he was institutionalized post his arrest. He also had a very refined sense of style, frequently donning suits and other formal attire that featured a lot of purple hues. Coming to his personality, Elijah as a character has a remarkable amount of complexity, which is in large part a result of the dual existence he leads as a terrorist and aspiring supervillain. He presents himself as a perfectly reputable member of society for the majority of the movie. He is smart, extremely knowledgeable in his area of study, and eager to see the world positively affected by the existence of a superhero. He even acts as a mentor to David, inspiring him to realize his full potential. He also exhibits a tremendous talent for charisma and deception, demonstrating his capacity to captivate an audience with lectures and off-the-wall topics of conversation. Even in the midst of a relatively routine discussion with his physiotherapist, he is able to shift the subject away from his physical therapy and onto his therapist's marital relationship, to the point where the therapist herself abandons all conversation of work in favor of an extensive conversation about her husband. On a far larger scale, Elijah is able to progressively persuade David and his child of the existence of superhumans and metahumans, to the point where even David, a skeptic, comes to be fascinated by the subjects, comes to be fascinated by the concept. But long before the big final reveal at the end of Unbreakable, Elijah shows a clearly obsessive side, both with comics and with attempting to prove David to be a superhero. In the case of the former, he is shown arguing with a wealthy client about how to use comic book art, potentially destroying a sale, and in the latter, he is prepared to go as far as to stalk David at his workplace in an effort to convince him. Further demonstrating his obsessive commitment, he risks his life by chasing a criminal down a flight of steps in an effort to confirm David's suspicion that the man was carrying a gun, all to prove that David might possibly have psychic power. The film's climax reveals that Elijah's obsessions are much more deadly and violent than their outward manifestations would lead one to believe. Suffering from a severe inferiority complex due to his disability, he is fueled to find his heroic polar opposite by any means possible, because he feels that is the only way to explain his existence. In order to achieve this, he went so far as to plan the deaths of hundreds or perhaps thousands of individuals in hotel fires, train accidents, and most recently, airport bombings. Elijah was able to carry out these crimes without the aid of a gang or any form of henchman, by using his exceptional intellect to create bombs and devise incredible acts of sabotage. He carried out these schemes with the help of his talent for manipulation. In David's flashback, Elijah can be seen limping out of the driver's chamber of the train he disrupted, but the driver disregards the sighting without giving it any further thought, since he did not even consider that a disabled person could be behind the tragedy. Not only was he able to trick a hotel employee into describing the structural flaws of the building he planned to burn down, but he was also able to make himself effectively rule out of suspicion by appearing too vulnerable to possibly pose a threat. Elijah never apologizes for what he did in the end, and he never thinks that his acts weren't justifiable. Although he is soon apprehended, Elijah is seen grinning through his tears, elated at his accomplishment in justifying his own creation. Rather than allowing his activities to go undetected, he decides to expose himself by shaking David's hand, enabling him to witness the true extent of his efforts to find his opposite using his superpower. Price also feels it is his duty to reveal the Clover organization's concealment of superhumans from the rest of the world during the events of Glass. Price appears to perceive himself as the mouthpiece of superhumans, holding himself in high regard as if he were some sort of authority figure on the subject. Elijah was a complicated man, and his life and deeds reflected the tortured nature of his existence.
Hey.
What makes Mr. Glass such a powerful supervillain? While David and Crumb both have visible superhuman abilities, Elijah Price has a more distinctive set of skills. The real strength Price possessed was his unusual brain, which enabled him to organize, foresee, and carry out his complex schemes nearly perfectly. He waited and allowed himself time to plan his grand scheme, which was to reveal the existence of superhumans in opposition to the group trying to deny and bury their presence. He appeared catatonic throughout the years between Unbreakable and Glass while he was held in an institution, which further showed that he was a brilliant actor and knew how to, in essence, toy with people. Despite his physical weakness, Elijah Price has proven to be a super genius in logic, methods, tactics, deception, and retention of knowledge. As a result, he has been able to accomplish most, if not all, of his desired end goals. Elijah's prodigious knowledge of comic book history and mythology, as well as his capacity to draw from old myths and tales to develop complicated and startlingly accurate theories and speculations about superhumans, are the clearest examples of this. Additionally, despite his intimidating demeanor and introverted lifestyle, Elijah has a certain amount of charisma that has enabled him to win the trust of people like David Dunn and Kevin Wendell Crumb in particular. Kevin's many personalities, including even the cannibalistic sociopath, the Beast. Elijah only lost David's friendship because he revealed his murderous nature to him, and the Horde's trust because Joseph revealed the truth to the Beast about Elijah's role in the death of Kevin's father, Clarence Wendell Crumb. Elijah Price is also adept at handling explosives and mechanical devices. Elijah's superhuman intellect also allowed him to pick up on new technology rapidly and find ways to take advantage of its flaws, as evidenced by the fact that he was able to hack into a computer despite being heavily sedated. Despite the Clover organization attempting to kill Mr. Glass, Dunn, and Crumb, Elijah was still able to permanently foil them with that last hack, exposing the existence of superhumans to the general public, something that the organization had worked for years to bury. Even though Price perished by the conclusion of Glass, he nevertheless achieved his goals of disclosing the existence of superpowered beings to the public and verifying their existence with Dunn and Crumb's video evidence, which, in his eyes, justified his entire life and deeds. On the one hand, David is practically indestructible, and on the other, Elijah breaks easily, which is why he relishes the moniker Mr. Glass that his childhood bullies called him. Last but not least, what makes him powerful and arguably quite scary is his belief that all his activities are justified since they are all in the name of the greater good. He believes that the existence of superheroes would change the world for the better, help avert disasters, and in general improve law and order. In fact, in the first movie of the series, Unbreakable, he even encourages David Dunn to actively seek out crime and put a stop to it. This shows that he does somewhat care about humanity and the future of mankind. However, his way of going about it is entirely different. He uses his larger good to justify his evil deeds to somehow make sense of the thousands of murders he has committed, explaining away the loss of life as necessary to arrive at his desired result. So the fact that Elijah does not acknowledge the terrible nature of his actions, truly believing that he is fighting for the greater good, makes him an even tougher villain to the corner and take down. Elijah is one of Samuel L. Jackson's top 10 favorite characters that he has played, and the actor has stated so in a number of interviews. Samuel L. Jackson additionally shares Elijah's enthusiasm for comic books and his preference for the color purple. In fact, Jackson actually proposed purple as Elijah's characteristic hue in the first place, claiming that this is frequently used by comic book villains, which is true given figures like the Joker, Lex Luthor, Thanos, and most obviously, Purple Man. This villain definitely stands out in a long line of pop culture villains as a ruthless, cunning, and successful one. What do you think of Samuel L. Jackson's portrayal of Mr. Glass in the Unbreakable trilogy? Tell us in the comments section below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.
I truly am a mastermind.